I work the graveyard shift at a local shipping warehouse. Most of my job is counting inventory, making sure all shipments and items are accounted for and are tracked through the whole organizing process. Every once in a while, I'll have a coworker on the same shift as me, but usually it's just me. This night was no different than any other. I got to the warehouse and checked in with my manager, who locked up the place and left me to it. I started doing my typical routine, checking all the shipments that came in during the day. As I did, and about an hour into my shift, I passed by a door that I noticed was cracked open. Like it was closed, but just not latched into the doorway, so it was sticking out a little bit. This specific door was on the back of the building, usually where truckers would enter from. I opened it and looked out, seeing an empty and quiet lot outside behind the warehouse. Nothing really to see at all. I figured my manager must have just forgotten to lock it. I didn't have the key to any of these sort of side access doors, so I couldn't lock it or anything, but honestly, I didn't really care. It just wasn't a big deal, at least not for me. I shut it behind me and went back to counting inventory. I was working pretty quick, getting through a decent amount and making it to the next aisle of shelves, when just from the corner of my eye, it looked like something moved at the far end of the hallway. I immediately looked up, but nothing was there. What it looked like, again from the side of my vision, was someone running across the opening of the hallway back there. I thought it had to be some weird trick my mind was playing on me, but it still got my heart pumping for a moment. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes, wondering what was up with me. I debated whether or not to check on it, but initially I decided not to, just because it would slow down my workflow to walk all the way down there, and because I was 99% sure it was nothing. Like, things like this happen all the time, thinking you see something in the corner of your eye, and every other time it ends up being nothing. So why would this be any different? But as the minutes passed, I couldn't shake the small feeling that it could have been someone. I sighed, somewhat disappointed in myself for being so unnerved by this, and walked down to the end of the hallway. This section I never really go to because it has nothing to do with my job. It's just a bunch of shelves full of large pallets, already prepped to be shipped out of the warehouse. Because I don't work in there, most of the lights were off. I just stood in the hallway and looked into the large, dark room for a few seconds, waiting to see if I saw anything move, but nothing did. I left the hallway and went back to work in the same spot I was before. I don't know if it was because of that small situation, but it felt like I just got hit by a wave of exhaustion. Suddenly, I was tired and not wanting to work as quickly as I was just a few minutes before all this happened. I wanted to finish this aisle before taking my break though, so I kept working. But not even 5 minutes passed before I suddenly noticed something in the side of my vision again. I jolted my eyes toward the end of the hallway. I swear it looked like a figure or someone was leaning out from behind the corner, like they were watching me. But now, nothing was there. This time, I immediately dropped what I was doing and hurried to the end of the hallway. Again though, it was dark, and I really didn't see anything at all. I called out, not really expecting any response, but figured it was worth a try.
Hello?
I waited a few seconds, then walked further into the room. It was so quiet, every step I took echoed all the way through the warehouse. I stopped about halfway through and looked around. As I stood there, I felt an incredibly disturbing and unsettling feeling of being watched, and not being able to see anything only made it worse. I hurried back to where I came from, making it to the other end of the hallway, before I glanced back one more time. The darkness in that room gave me chills. I started to walk away to go back to work, when a sudden, extremely loud thud rang through the warehouse. It was metallic, like someone banging metal against one of the large shelving units. Afterward, there were a few seconds of silence, only filled by the faint echoes lingering through the room, before there was another thud. Quieter this time, like a repeated tapping against the metal shelf. It was like they were trying to get my attention, to lure me back into the dark room. But knowing this had to be a person now, and being completely horrified, I ran away. I went to the back door and out into the parking lot. After making it a safe distance, I called for help. I really didn't expect much from the police, at least not right away. But surprisingly, when they went in, they found someone hiding behind one of the large shelves in the dark room. It was a man in his 40s with a very disheveled and creepy look. But even more creepy is that when they reviewed the security footage, they found him walking around the outside of the building several times throughout the last week, and going around checking all the doors to see if they were unlocked. All of these nights, I was alone inside the warehouse, sometimes just on the other side of the door from him. From the short amount that I saw him get dragged out of the warehouse and into the cop car, the guy seemed pretty unhinged and crazy. I don't know if they ever really figured out what he was trying to do, but just thinking about him trying to lure me into the room still makes me really uneasy. When I was in college, I worked part-time overnight shifts at my parents' 24/7 laundromat. It was just some dinky place on the edge of town. The building I had always found surprisingly creepy for what it was. Something about the place being really old, and the machines constantly humming in the background, was just unsettling. I still thought it was better working at a place my parents owned over anywhere else though. This was a Friday, which was the only day I worked a full overnight shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I took over from my dad, who left me some snacks in the back room and told me the usual, to call and wake him if I needed anything. There were still a few customers trickling in for the next hour, so I stayed behind the counter and made sure it all ran smoothly. By midnight, everyone was gone and all the machines were left empty. I waited behind the counter for another 15 minutes, just sitting on my phone and waiting a bit longer before doing any of the cleaning tasks. But during that time, a customer walked in. I looked up and was pretty confused. He had nothing with him, like no clothes or laundry of any kind, and he had a thick hoodie with the hood over his head and hands in his pockets. I said hello, but he didn't look at me or say anything back. He just walked in and slowly made his way through the aisles of washers and dryers, kind of looking around, I guess, before going back to the entrance and leaving out the doors. I couldn't help but watch him as he left and walked out into the parking lot. He didn't get into any car or anything. He just crossed the street and went out of sight. It's not every day someone walks into a laundromat in the middle of the night for no reason and just walks around. I guess he didn't technically do anything wrong, but I felt really weird about it. Being alone in there definitely didn't help. I think if other customers were inside, I would have felt safer for sure, and maybe not even noticed anything. With nothing to do about it though, I just started doing my cleaning tasks. As I cleaned, the only reason I could think of for that guy coming in and walking around was that maybe he was looking for a lost clothing item that he might have dropped earlier in the day. It was a stretch, considering the obvious thing to do would be to ask me if I had seen it, but he didn't. That's pretty much all I thought about for the next 20-ish minutes as I walked around and cleaned off all the counters and tidied up the place. At some point though, I happened to look up from what I was doing, and standing right outside the entrance was that guy from before. I almost didn't even realize it was a person behind the glass, because he was wearing all black, and of course it was dark outside. By the time I did and recognized him, he had started walking away already. How long was he standing there watching me for? After a few moments, I went up to the door and got as close as I could to look down the storefront, but the guy was already gone. I couldn't even see where he went. Something about his appearance and the eerie way he was just showing up was really creepy and didn't make me feel comfortable at all. I thought about calling my dad, but I would have felt horrible waking him up and having him take over my shift just because of some guy I thought was slightly suspicious. I knew my dad wouldn't give me a hard time about it, but I was still in my first couple of months working there and wanted to prove I was reliable. I stayed on the lookout for the next hour, pretty much sitting behind the counter and staring out the front windows the whole time. After more and more time passed though, and with still no customers coming in at all, I slowly started to pay less attention. I was on my phone for a while, just trying to wait out the time, until there were a couple short creak sounds from the back of the building. I got up and walked a few steps toward the back, trying to listen. I could hear what sounded like shuffling around, or someone moving things in one of the back rooms. I only listened for a few seconds before knowing someone was back there and realizing I needed to leave. I turned and quietly moved to the front door, preparing to call the cops and pushing on it to leave. But the door got stuck. It wouldn't open. I looked down, seeing through the glass that something was around the handles on the outside of the door. I immediately realized that that's what the man was doing outside the building when I saw him standing by the door watching me. My whole body filled with panic. There was only one back exit door. I started very quietly stepping closer to the back room, still hearing them moving stuff around back there, but definitely doing so in a careful way, as if they were trying to be quiet about it. When I got to the doorway and looked in, I saw him. His back was facing me as he was searching through some of the boxes on the floor. Then I looked at the exit. This was my chance. I sprinted for the door. The man immediately shifted around and saw me. I got to the door, and for a moment, my heart sank. There was some makeshift-looking rope tied around the handle, like he was trying to tie it shut. Fortunately, whatever he did didn't work, and I was still able to force it open and make a run for it. As soon as I was out of the building, the man came out too, but now out in the open, he didn't chase me. He just made a run for it. My dad and police came, but there wasn't a lot of leads on where he could have gone to. Clearly, that man was trying to trap me inside with him. I'm assuming he was trying to do it sneakily, but had to look around for something to help tie down the back exit door, which ultimately allowed me to escape when I did. His intentions were likely horrifying, and now replaying the whole night back, it feels crazy that I didn't notice anything was really wrong until the last minute. At least now, I'm 1,000 times more aware when I'm working alone, never trusting anyone to be truly harmless, because I know if that man was successful in locking that back door, there would have been no escape for me. For a few years, I had a gig at a private company as a data entry clerk. It was your typical low-tier job that wasn't too well respected at the workplace. The managers were constantly adding on more and more work that I wasn't even supposed to be doing under the data entry title. But I was young, and this was my first real job, so I just went with it. Now, the office was on the 5th and top floor of a large office building in a small business center situated in the suburbs, right outside of the city. Our company only had the 5th floor, and the other floors were rented out to different businesses. As far as I knew, all these other businesses were service-based, so their offices would empty out by 5 or 6 every night. Ours was the only one that sometimes had people work later. As the data entry clerk, and basically doing every other odd job as well, I was often the one to stay late some nights, with whatever busy work that needed to be done. I made the least at the company, so paying me to work extra hours past closing wasn't a big deal to them. This night, my boss gave me a bunch of stuff to get done. He didn't even ask if I could stay late, he just assumed I was good for it. And me being the pushover I was at the time, I just went with it. The extra money always helped, and with the office empty, I actually enjoyed the work better, not having to be under the stress of being watched and micromanaged all day. So come 6 o'clock, everyone else started heading home, and I stayed to continue working. After 30 minutes, the main lights in the building turned off, leaving just the low power-saving lights on. I sat at the computer, going through the motions and working at a comfortable pace for me. About 3 full hours went by. The building was dark and quiet, and I'd just been focused on my work, when suddenly I heard something below me. Obviously, with the massive building and all the rooms in it, the sound was very muffled and echoey, but I thought it sounded like a door opening or closing. I looked up from my computer for a few seconds, listening to try and figure out what it could have been, but not hearing anything else, I just got back to work. I really didn't think about it all that much. I mean, I didn't think it was actually likely that it was a door that I heard, and it was probably just the building settling and creaking. I didn't hear anything afterward either to warrant me to think any more about it. After that, I want to say 30 to 45 minutes passed. I had finished nearly all of the work I needed to get done. I think I only had about an hour worth of stuff to get done before I could head home. It was getting pretty well into the night though, and I felt my eyes getting sleepy, so I got up to grab a small cup of coffee from the Keurig that the office had by the entrance. I headed over and started the brew, and I don't know how I didn't notice it the whole walk up to the coffee station, but when I walked back to my desk, coffee in hand, I realized that the door to the hallway was open. This was the one in the back of the room that led to just the utility closet and the staircase that goes down to the other floors. That door was always closed because basically nobody uses it. Curious, I walked over to the doorway and just poked my head out and looked around. I saw the door to the staircase and the door to the closet, both closed and showing no signs of anything. As I was over there though, I did feel a chill run through me and kind of fill me with an uneasy feeling. I thought it was probably just because of the dim lighting in that hallway though. At night, it was kind of dark and pretty creepy. I went up to the door to the staircase and looked through it, just double checking, then went back into the room and closed the door behind me, heading back to my desk. I just had an hour of work left. If I could just get it done and get out of here, then there was no need to worry about anything. That door being open was really strange though, and I knew there was no reason anyone should be coming up here, or would have come up here and not said anything. I tried to keep working, doing my best to get it done quickly, but it was hard. Every couple minutes, I'd get that unnerving feeling that I was being watched. I'd lift my head up from the screen and look around, only to see nothing. It started bothering me because I knew it was taking away from my focus and making everything take longer. But at the same time, the feeling was so strong, I couldn't help but look up every time. This went on for 30 minutes, but then, as I was looking at the screen, everything around me went dark. All the dim overhead lights just suddenly shut off. Only the pale white computer screen illuminated the area around me. Everything else was pitch black. I immediately swung my head toward the other side of the room where I knew the light switches were, standing up to hurry over there, but stopped before I could even take a step. In the silence of the building, I could hear the soft, slow footsteps of someone walking from that direction, one after the other, walking closer and closer to me from the darkness past the illumination of the computer screen. I listened, frozen in fear for a few seconds before my adrenaline pulsed through me and I ran from my desk. I went straight for the door to the staircase. I made it to the hallway and into the staircase, where finally there was some light. I didn't stop running until I got to the first floor and out of the building. Obviously then, I called 911. I stood in the cold outside the building for nearly 15 minutes before an officer arrived, and then waited another 5 minutes for 2 more officers before they finally searched the building. And by then, they found no one inside. Just as frustrating, it took 2 days to get the security footage, and yet it wasn't all that helpful anyway. The building was old and had a 30-year-old security system that was in black and white and really pixelated and blurry, too much so to see anything. All they knew is the person entered the building around 2 p.m., saying he had an appointment with one of the other companies. Then he pretty much right away hid in the utility closet until everyone left, except for me. He walked around for a while until he noticed I was still there, and at that point it's not clear what he was trying to do or what he wanted. Maybe he was just trying to scare me out of the office, or maybe he had a more sinister intention. Without any real conclusion though, I decided to quit afterward. I'm really glad I did for a lot of reasons, but not having to be alone in that building after that incident was a big one, especially knowing he still has never been found. Me and a childhood friend of mine, I'll call him Ethan, were out in the forests of Maine on a short camping trip. We both were fairly experienced. However, this was Ethan's first time going to this spot. I'd been there plenty of times before though, so I knew the area pretty well. We backpacked down a several-hour-long trail to get to a clearing in the trees that we set up camp in. I think we arrived around 6, so after setting everything up, we built up a nice campfire and made food, then cracked open a few beers and talked around the fire as the sun set around us. It was a chill, enjoyable night. I want to say around 2 hours into the night though, we both heard what we thought was something moving around just outside of our campsite, like in the darkness, past what our campfire was lighting up. We looked and saw nothing, and for the rest of the night, we heard nothing else. We thought it was probably just a small animal scurrying away. Honestly, if nothing else happened, I never even would have remembered it or thought about it again. That's how insignificant it seemed in the moment. If you're unfamiliar with camping, it might seem strange, but being out here all the time, those kinds of noises happen a lot and are almost always nothing to worry about. Once we had our couple drinks and started getting tired, we called it a night and poured out the fire, then got in our tents and fell asleep. In the morning, we woke up early, as this spot was good for a reason. That reason is because there was a very secluded, private pond just a half-mile through the woods from the campsite. Nobody knew about it, because the trail didn't actually lead to it. It was really nice though, having a mini waterfall and small river running through it. We spent most of our morning there, like a whole 3 or 4 hours. Eventually, we headed back to make food and rest for a bit. I even took a short nap. Again though, around 6, the sun was getting lower, and we hadn't collected any firewood yet for the campfire. Most of the dry sticks lying around the camp we used up last night, so I had to do a little more searching to collect what we needed. Midway through, Ethan said he was going to take a walk around and just explore the other areas, but would pick up whatever he could on his way back. I said sure, and just continued grabbing sticks off the ground. Ethan did this pretty much every time we were out camping. I think he just enjoyed having some time to spend alone and to just take in the nature. Anyway, I got a good amount of firewood and sat back down at the camp, just wasting time until Ethan got back so I could start the fire. The sun got lower and lower, and eventually I just kind of realized it had been a strangely long time since he'd left. Usually he wasn't out this long, and he was experienced enough to know to not be wandering the woods so close to sunset. The only way we had to keep in contact out here, where there's no service, is through our small satellite messengers. We kept them on us at all times in our small waste packs, along with bear spray and other stuff like that. It's usually more of an SOS device, but in situations like this, it came in handy too. I pulled mine out to send him a message, but saw that he'd already sent me one just a few minutes ago. Ethan said he got kinda lost, but happened to stumble back to the pond. I sent a message saying to just stay there and I'll hurry over to lead him back. Being lost, it's always best just to stay put and not risk getting any more lost, and both me and Ethan knew that. So, me knowing the area, I quickly started heading to the pond. At this point, it was really just a race against the sun. Even having headlamps and knowing the area during the day, it would still be really easy to get lost at night. I got about halfway to the pond, maybe 4 or 5 minutes away, when I got another message. I reached into my bag and checked it, assuming it was just going to be him checking in or asking for an ETA. But Ethan sent the words, "I see you." What did he mean, "I see you"? I wasn't even near the pond yet. I stopped and looked around, confused and not seeing him anywhere. I said I wasn't there yet and didn't see him. Slightly worried, I started moving faster, basically running to the pond. I got there quickly, running up to the tree line before the water. Ethan wasn't there. From where I was, I could see the whole tree line around the pond, and he wasn't anywhere around. I felt blood rush from my face and pulled the messenger back out. My last message saying that I didn't see him hadn't been opened. I called out his name, hearing my voice echo through the trees. The sun was nearly gone, and the forest was getting quieter and darker. Maybe he already started heading back, like he somehow remembered the way. I don't know why he would, but where else would he be? With the daylight practically gone, I knew it was safest for me to head back and figure things out from the camp. I didn't start the fire yet, so if I waited too long, I'd never be able to find the campsite in the dark. I began walking, feeling uneasy as I moved through the trees and felt the woods get darker and darker. All I could think about was the ominous last message he sent, "I see you." It was nearly pitch black by the time I was a minute or so from the clearing, but then I saw something. A flickering orange glow right from where the campsite was. As I got closer, I could see that the campfire was lit and someone was standing right by it. I started approaching, feeling a wave of relief, knowing Ethan had made it back safely. But when I got closer, the person suddenly shifted and looked toward me, then sprinted away from the fire and out of the campsite. Heart pumping, I ran up, confused and terrified. That wasn't Ethan. I pulled my messenger back out and started spamming texts. At this point, I was seriously worried and disturbed by what was going on. But just a minute or so later, Ethan came running out of the woods and into the campsite. He had a face of both fear and relief. He immediately said we had to go. I agreed, mentioning the guy I saw by the fire, and him saying it was likely the same guy he saw approaching him by the pond. He said he thought it was me, until he got closer and realized it was someone else. Apparently then, Ethan tried asking if the guy knew how to get back to the trail, but the man didn't respond. He just kept walking forward, revealing a really unsettling smile across his face. And according to Ethan, something about him looked really off, like his face was uncanny. Something just wasn't normal about it. This sent him into a panic, where he just ran in the direction he thought was most likely toward the campsite, getting lost again, but eventually seeing the fire and going toward it. We packed and left. The hike back was unnerving to say the least, but we did manage to get to our car and leave. This event made me rethink back on the whole camping trip, remembering the movement we heard outside of our camp on the first night, and just putting all the pieces together. Likely, the man that was out there was watching us the whole time, waiting for one of us to be alone. Even just thinking about his presence outside of our campsite as we were talking, sleeping, and everything, completely unknown to us, is extremely disturbing. We still talk about that camping trip every now and again, but never plan to go back to those woods. I was taking a short getaway alone to an Airbnb about 6 hours away from where I lived. I didn't choose it for any reason in particular. I just opened the map on Airbnb and looked for something cheap and somewhat isolated in a smaller town, just so I could get out of the city and enjoy some quiet for a few days. I didn't actually care about how nice the town was, because I planned to be in the Airbnb pretty much the whole time. The house I booked was alone in a small forest inside of this really small town, and it was the only house listed on Airbnb for that whole area. The good price reeled me in though. I made the drive, mostly through empty wooded roads, until I got to the house. I guess it was more of a cabin though, if I'm being honest. It was older and surrounded by trees, with no other houses or buildings in sight. I opened the creaky front door and brought everything in. The only thing I needed to do before settling in for the next few days was go to the grocery store and stock up on some food and drinks. I drove into town. It was mid-afternoon, but there were almost no other cars or people out. Maybe it was just because I was from the city, but even for a small town like this, it felt like I was driving through a ghost town. And when I walked through the grocery store, it was just as empty. The few people I did pass by, though, gave me a strange, cold look, following me with their eyes as I passed by them. It almost felt like they all somehow knew that I wasn't from here, and they didn't like it. It was really weird. I got what I needed and headed back to the cabin. By then, I think I'd mostly decided that I was just being paranoid over nothing. There's no way those people actually cared who I was. I was just some random person in a grocery store. I shook it off and felt better knowing I wasn't going into town for the rest of the trip anyway. I unpacked and watched TV in the living room. That whole night and the next day was nice and quiet. That following night, though, it was pouring outside. A storm had rolled in and didn't seem like it was going to stop or slow down anytime soon. I was cozied up inside, of course, laying on the couch half asleep, when there was a knock at the door to the cabin. I shot up and looked at the door. There's no way someone was outside the house in the middle of this storm. I checked my phone and saw no texts or anything from the Airbnb host. It was also just that one knock at the door. After maybe 30 seconds, I got up and walked over. When I looked out, I didn't see anyone, although it was really dark and there was no porch light, so without opening the door, I couldn't make out all that much. As the minutes passed, my mind stumbled to every possibility that wasn't someone knocking at the door, like maybe the storm blowing something over, or even me dreaming it while being half asleep. I think I really just didn't want to believe someone was out there, because I knew how unsettling that would be. I laid back down on the couch and had the TV on, sort of paying half attention and just laying there. A decent amount of time went by. I wasn't keeping track, but if I had to guess, I'd say about an hour. The TV was fairly quiet, but the storm was still going on. Between those sounds, though, there was a sudden cough behind me, like a man quickly coughing and trying to cover the sound. I jolted my head back and looked, immediately seeing something move away from the outside of the window. I'd only caught a split second of it, not enough to even make out if it was a reflection or a figure, but obviously hearing the cough gave it away. Someone was outside the Airbnb. I knew they had to have been watching into the cabin through that window, which instantly sent chills through me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, telling them I think I was being stalked and that someone was creeping around outside. The storm was too loud for me to hear any footsteps, so I had no idea if they ran away or were still around out there. I was relieved when a police officer showed up only 3 minutes later. I opened the door and started explaining what was going on, but the officer was visibly unbothered by anything. When I finished explaining, he just responded with, "That's it," as if it was no big deal. The officer didn't take down any notes or anything. He had that same cold look as everyone else in the town. He almost seemed mad at me, like he was genuinely upset for making him come out into the storm to help me. He said he didn't see anyone when he pulled in, so if something actually happens, then to call. Before I could say anything else, he turned his back on me and drove away. I honestly couldn't believe it. That made me feel even less safe and even more disturbed by whatever the hell was going on in this town. This whole town had me on edge, and knowing something wasn't right, I decided to call it early and just get out of there. I locked the door and started rushing to pack my things. I was only able to get my backpack opened and begin stuffing clothes into it, so like maybe 60 seconds went by after the officer left before heavy knocks slammed against the front door again. But this time, they didn't leave. They continued to bang on the door. I only checked out of the bedroom window, confirming the cop car was gone, so I knew this was whoever had been watching me. I hurried, packing everything I could in just 3 or 4 minutes. I thought about calling the cops again, but honestly, I felt like it would somehow only get me in trouble, or that the cop would somehow take the other guy's side even if he did catch them. But then they suddenly stopped knocking. The storm felt like it got increasingly louder. I couldn't hear if they left or not, so I quietly walked up to the door and looked out. I saw nothing. No one was out there. I knew I needed to leave whenever I had the chance, so I had my backpack on and my car keys ready. I was at the door for about a minute or so, before I just happened to glance back, and again, at that same window, I saw something move. I knew this was my only chance to make a run for it. I swung open the door and fled out of the cabin into the storm. My heart was racing, knowing the person was probably running around the house to get to me. I got in my car, turned it on, and pulled out of the driveway. With the heavy downpour, I couldn't even see more than 10 feet ahead, so I don't know if they had chased me or not. They could have even been right behind me, running up to the car as I pulled away, and I wouldn't have been able to see them. I drove down the forested driveway until I got to the road, then left town and drove all the way home without stopping. That was the most unsettling and creepy experience of my life, and I think it's worse because I don't know why any of it was happening, or even who it was creeping around the cabin, watching me through the windows and banging on the door. I keep thinking about the weird feeling I got in that town, thinking maybe people knew that the cabin was an Airbnb, and them hating outsiders for some reason, they went to extreme measures to get rid of me. It almost gave me the feeling that I was in the middle of a town that was all part of a private cult or something. If I decided to stay that night, things might have escalated past the point of no return. Luckily, I didn't have to find out though. This was just 7 or 8 months ago. My friend Josh was a buddy of mine that I'd been close friends with since senior year of college, so about 3 years at the time. We were really close that last year of college, but due to jobs and everything after college, I ended up moving to a city about 3 hours away from him. We hadn't seen each other since then, so well over a year. But we remained in contact and still really good friends, constantly staying up late gaming together and texting during the days. You know, regular stuff like that. But on a Thursday, kind of out of the blue, he called me, saying his girlfriend was gone for the weekend and asking if I wanted to hang out and spend the weekend at his place. Weirdly, on the call, he sounded like he just woke up, or was really tired or something. But whatever. I had no plans that weekend, and hadn't had a chance to see him for a long time, so I said I'd be there. I spent that night packing, and on Friday morning, I drove down there. The drive took up most of my day, because I had to make a couple stops to pick up some drinks and whatnot, but at 4:30, I made it to his house. This place, Josh and his girlfriend of 4 or 5 years had rushed to buy right out of college. They both already had jobs and everything, and the house was super cheap. Old for sure, but cheap nonetheless. It was kinda trashy and out in the middle of nowhere, 30 minutes from the college we went to, not really in a neighborhood or anything. I went up and knocked on the door. Then knocked again. I think I was waiting outside for a whole 5 minutes before he finally answered the door and invited me in. Immediately, I noticed how different he looked. He had this really tired expression covering his face. He usually had a ton of energy, so this was kinda strange. I thought maybe he was just having an off day or something though. We hung out and played some Xbox for a bit, and having a few drinks, mostly just catching up and hanging out like we used to. Still, Josh was noticeably a lot different than he was just a year ago, or even when we'd game online. In person now, he acted like a completely different person altogether. Honestly, it kind of felt like he didn't even want to be hanging out with me. Again, I thought he had to have just been having an unusual day. I mean, we all have them. But as it got later, and before drinking too much, I threw it out there that maybe we should just hit the hay early. Go to bed now so we could be re-energized for the whole day tomorrow. But through his droopy eyes and tired, gravelly voice, he said we should stay up tonight. It seemed like he was barely even able to stay awake, so this was getting really weird. And the more I said that we should just go to bed, the more pushy about it he got. I agreed to hang out for another 30-ish minutes, but during that time, it was really awkward. He was clearly too tired to even hold a conversation, so most of the time, we were just sitting there in silence, occasionally sipping on our beverages. It honestly felt really uncomfortable, like I wasn't even sitting in the same room as one of my friends. I wondered how this was even the same friend I once knew and hung out with all the time. And why was he only acting like this in person? I tried asking what he'd been up to and how everything's been, but he avoided any questions like that. Eventually, I said I had to get some sleep, and even though he tried pushing me to stay up, I refused. I was pretty worried about him, and a little creeped out to be honest, but hoped things would be more normal tomorrow. I went into the spare bedroom to get ready for bed, but something was off about it. The whole room was empty. There was not a single thing in there, aside from the small bed against the wall. And just as strange, it looked brand new, like it was bought specifically for me coming over. By now, I was beginning to consider that I was overthinking everything. Still, I really just wanted to make sure Josh was okay, so I sent a text to his girlfriend. Like I said, they'd been together for 5 years, and we all hung out together a few times during college, but I didn't really know her that well. I only waited a couple of minutes before she responded. All I'd said was that Josh was acting a little weird and seemed out of it, so I asked if she noticed anything recently as well, or if she might have known why he was like this right now. She said that they've been broken up and that she'd moved out 4 months ago and had no idea what I was talking about. What? I was actually in shock. Why did he lie about her just being gone for the weekend? And why'd he have me come over so suddenly now and not months ago? Things weren't adding up. It still didn't explain why he was acting so strange, and only made me feel like I couldn't trust him even more, making the whole thing more unsettling. Not wanting to sleep without getting answers, I turned back toward the door to leave the room, but froze in place. I could see a shadow standing right behind the door. After a second, he moved away. I felt my heart start racing a bit as I moved closer to the door and listened, then opened it, stepping into the hallway and closing the door behind me. I saw the door to his bedroom was open, and I could hear him moving around in there. All the lights in the house were off now, but right away, I noticed something on the backside of the door that wasn't there before. It was a mount, like one side screwed into the wall and the other into the door. He had to have just done this, probably hand screwing it in as I was in the room trying to figure out what was going on. I didn't want to be inside that house with him for another second. I started quickly and quietly walking away. As I got into the living room, I couldn't help but notice that there was something on the kitchen counter. It was an open package for a deadbolt, one of those locks you'd put on a door that you can only access from one side. I felt my stomach drop, then heard footsteps rushing behind me. I turned around and saw Josh, that same tired and dead look on his face. I asked what the hell he was trying to do, but he didn't respond. I felt a tension, like he was about to do something. Before he could, I ran to the front door. He called out my name a couple times in that eerie, tired voice, but I kept going, getting in my car and leaving. I spent that whole drive thinking and decompressing on what just happened. By the time I got home, Josh had blocked me on everything, which made me more sure that what he was doing was something awful. Though at the time, I didn't do anything about it. I was stupid, and I guess I felt since nothing yet had happened, I had nothing to show for it. And having been close to him for 3 years, it was hard for me to turn him in. I still just can't understand why he was trying to lock me inside that room though, or even what his plan really was. It's crazy how I'd known him for 3 years, and yet it feels like maybe I never really knew him. I'm just glad I got out of it when I did.
This happened 3 nights ago, and so I'm going crazy trying to figure it out. I just moved into a new apartment 1 month ago, and I'm still unpacking and settling in. I have been using my parents' address as my mailing address. They live a few towns over, like 20 minutes away, all of my life. 3 nights ago, my parents called me at 2 o'clock a.m., freaked out, and proceeded to tell me this story. Apparently at 1 a.m., someone starts banging on their front door and repeatedly ringing their doorbell. My stepdad walks downstairs and opens the door, leaving the front glass door closed and locked. There was a man standing outside who looked to be in his 30s with a black hoodie on with the hood pulled up around his face. He didn't have any distinguishing facial features, facial hair or tattoos. The only thing my stepdad said was that he looked to be Hispanic. Neither my stepdad nor my mother, who was watching the whole thing out a window, recognized the man. The man says, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for, insert my full name here." My stepdad plays dumb and says, "Who?" The man proceeds to state my full name again and says that my boyfriend is worried because I didn't come home that night. He claims to be a friend of my boyfriend and tells my stepdad that they are both out looking for me, worried because I didn't show up at home. I don't have a boyfriend. I live by myself with my 3 dogs and haven't been in a relationship in the past 6 months. Here's the weird part. My stepdad asked the guy what boyfriend he was talking about, and the man told him the name of the boyfriend I had when I was in 10th grade, nearly 20 years ago. My boyfriend in 10th grade has a very, very unique Italian name, and I've never met anyone with a full name even close to his. He says my high school boyfriend's name a few more times to ensure my stepdad heard him, and repeats that they are very worried about me. Is my stepdad sure I'm not inside? At this point, my stepdad is weirded out and closes and locks the door in his face. But the man doesn't leave. He lingers in front of my parents' house for the next 10 minutes, smoking cigarettes and talking on the phone. Finally, they call the cops. About 5 minutes before the cops arrive, the man walks down to the dead end on their block and drives away in a silver car. Stepdad was unable to get the license plate. My parents filed a police report and nothing else happens. After I hear this story, I'm going nuts over the weird details. How would somebody know who I dated nearly 20 years ago? And what would be the motive of making up a story that included that weird detail about my past? I have not had contact with a 10th grade boyfriend in over a decade. Yesterday, I decided to message him on Facebook to see if he has any insight. I tell him the whole story. He's just as confused as I am and claims to have no part in it. I am at a loss. I am also really freaked out that some strange man is going through that much trouble at 1 a.m. to look for me. Any insights or ideas would be greatly appreciated. No, nothing else has happened since then. Alright, so 1 year later, I finally have an update to this mystery. My stepsister, my stepdad's daughter, and her fiance were at a house party right after the holidays, around early January of this year. While they were there, they started talking to a girl that neither of them knew. After some time talking together, the girl started talking about her ex-boyfriends and how they were going through a really tough time together. They had just recently broke up, and she felt really bad because he was a wreck over it. Somehow, it came up that this girl's ex-boyfriend was my 10th grade boyfriend, the one with a really unique Italian name. The whole situation wasn't that big of a coincidence since I went to high school with my stepsister's fiance and we have a lot of mutual friends. So it makes sense that they were at a party that would include some other people I went to school with. As soon as my stepsister and her fiance hear this, they both start freaking out and, without revealing too many details, they tell the girl about the whole mystery and how weird it was. As they are telling the story, the girl's face starts to go white and she looks like she's about to cry. My stepsister and fiance try to console her and ask her what's wrong. The wine and beer had been flowing at this point, so I'm sure everyone was a little tipsy. The girl starts to tell them that a few nights ago she was sleeping and someone started banging on her door at, get this, 1 a.m., just like what happened to me at my parents'. The girl jumps out of bed and says she was absolutely terrified by how loudly and aggressively somebody was banging on her door. She said she literally thought it was going to break in. The girl has a Ring camera, so she looks on her phone. There on the camera is a guy in a black hoodie banging on her door. She obviously pretends like she isn't home and keeps all the lights off. He continues banging. As she is getting ready to dial 911, the guy stops and leaves. She said she was absolutely terrified. For whatever reason, she didn't end up calling the cops, but may have gone to stay with a friend that night or the night after. So my stepsister and fiance are shocked by the details and how similar it is to my story, especially because of the mutual ex-boyfriend we share. Except this girl literally just broke things off with him. They ask the girl if she has any idea who the guy is, and she says no, but that it definitely is not the actual ex-boyfriend. She said this guy was much taller and heavier than our shared mutual ex. How fucking weird. This mystery is still unsolved, and these new details honestly just make my head spin even more. No one else has showed up to my parents' door since the actual incident a year ago. So last Friday night, I, 17 male, was home alone with my family, besides my sister, 21, who was at work. Stayed in their cabin a few kilometers away. I'm used to staying home alone, as this exact scenario is very common in the summertime, especially while I'm working and can't travel from the cabin and back. I'm not usually jumpy or afraid while home alone anymore, used to the odd creaks and settling noises of our old house. I was especially comforted by the fact that my sister's dog was also in the house with me that night, and most noises could be attributed to him, and if anything were to happen, he would act as a guard dog of sorts and alert me to anything odd. At the same time, however, he is the type of dog to bark at any noise or person walking past the door or windows, so I'm used to hearing him bark or growl at night. Even so, this past Friday, the sound of his barks at nearly 12 a.m. was disconcerting, to say the least. Despite my comfort with staying home alone, I'm still terrified of the premise of a break-in or some other uninvited human interaction at midnight. I let him bark for a few seconds, telling myself it was just someone walking past our glass door in the adjacent alleyway, and he would quiet down once they passed. Needless to say, that's not what happened. He kept barking and growling for a few moments too long, and I finally got out of bed. I sleep in the basement, and walked upstairs to check it out. As I'd suspected, he was standing alert at the glass door. I was comforted for a moment until I walked over, ready to close the curtains and go back to sleep. and saw the door open about 2 or 3 inches. I froze. I had let Bosco, the dog, out earlier that night, but I know I closed the door. I've never left this door open. I am a paranoid person with bad anxiety, especially concerning break-ins and the like, so I would never, home alone, forget to close the door. I am 100% certain. But at the time, I didn't let myself think about these facts or even acknowledge that I could not have left the door open, because I knew it would send me into a spiral, possibly even an anxiety attack if I didn't explain this away. I closed and locked the door, double checking that it was certainly locked. Using the flashlight on my phone, the lights were all off. I looked around the entire second floor of my 3-floor house, including closets and other reasonable hiding spots, just to put my mind at ease. And upon finding nothing, I went back downstairs to my room. As I was down there trying to push away the fear, I could hear Bosco walking around on the floor that doubles as my bedroom's roof. I thought I was overthinking it when it started to sound like human footsteps, accompanied by Bosco's footsteps. He walks around for about 10 minutes before I put in my earphones and talk myself down until I can fall asleep. At 2 a.m. that same night, my sister comes home from work. I woke up a few minutes before this to Bosco in the basement, which he never does. There's even a gate to stop him from getting to the basement, whining at my bedroom door. When I got up to let him out, my sister walked in, and we let him out the front door rather than the glass patio door, letting him in the same way. We talked for a while before I went back downstairs and my sister went to the bathroom. I forgot about the door, busy with work for the next few days, and forgot to mention it to anyone until tonight. My sister and mom were home with me for a movie night while my dad and brother stayed at the cabin. I remember the door situation when we were picking out horror movies to watch. I was sharing it as a creepy, almost funny story before my sister spoke up, saying that same night, an hour or so after they got home, the door was open again. The same door that was locked from the inside and not open since earlier that night. My stomach dropped and I started shaking the second this was revealed. We first started trying to explain it away. Maybe she had let Bosco out and forgot to close it until we both recalled that we'd used the front door. Then we were trying to justify a reason someone would break in to not steal anything and proceed to stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ultimately, I realized that I quite possibly locked someone in the house with me, then forced them to hide upstairs while I searched the second level of our house. Then this hypothetical person would be trapped up there now, knowing that this house, that appears empty with the rest of my family gone and all the lights off, was not empty, and there was a dog who would bark if they showed themselves again, alerting me to their presence. Then, when I was in the basement and my sister was in the bathroom, they ran out the glass door, which is timed perfectly to when they found the door open once more, much wider than when I found it, as though they were only in a hurry on the way out. Perhaps they left it open the first time for a quick escape or to stop the loud sound of it meeting the doorframe. Either way, it ties together too perfectly for me to reasonably brush it off. I know it's unlikely, especially with nothing missing, but in this small town, there have been many reports of break-ins with nothing missing, vandalism, or just breaking and entering many times. So it's not as unlikely as it may be in a bigger city. I can't make sense of this, and I'm shaken up thinking of the possibility of someone being in my house while I was asleep, alone in the basement. There's a part of me that doesn't believe it, but I can't shake the too many coincidences that all tie together to make this as concerning as it is. Back in 2019, I, 18 female, decided to download Tinder a few months after a rough breakup. I was very inexperienced with dating and pretty shy, so it seemed unlikely that I would meet a potential partner in person. Anyway, after a few matches that led to nothing, I came across the profile of someone that I found very attractive, 21 male. We matched, exchanged Snapchats, and continued to set up a date. Our first date was relatively normal and enjoyable. We saw a movie, and by the end of it, I felt like we hit it off. However, our relationship was extremely short-lived. Not long after I had agreed to be his girlfriend, after about a month of going out, he began to behave very erratically and would sometimes fall completely silent in the middle of conversation, ignoring me when I tried to ask him what was wrong. He became hot-tempered, slamming doors and speeding on the road when he was mad. I started to feel really uncomfortable about our relationship. This went on for about a few weeks until one night, When we were on our way to have dinner downtown, he fell silent mid-conversation. I became extremely anxious as he pulled into a nearby parking garage, wondering what I had done to upset him. As we parked, I decided to ask him what was wrong. He didn't answer. When I asked him again, he shouted at me to shut the fuck up. I was completely frozen for a moment, but I finally got up the courage to tell him we were done, gather my belongings from the car, and walk over to the nearest coffee shop to call an Uber. It was fairly late at night, so I walked as fast as I could, hoping he wouldn't follow me. When I made it to the stop, I noticed I had several missed calls from him. When I made it home that night, I blocked him on all social media and decided to never contact him again. I'm fairly familiar with the dynamic of toxic relationships, and I knew that if he could talk to me that way, completely unprompted, it was likely that he was capable of much more. About a week goes by. As I start to settle my emotions a bit, I decide to confide in a friend who had never met the guy about what happened, feeling completely embarrassed. A few nights later, I received a text from the same friend. It was a screenshot of an Instagram DM from someone she didn't follow, my now ex. It said something to the effect of, "Hey, I'm so sorry we're having to meet like this, but Redacted is ignoring me and I need to talk to her." My heart sank. I decided to message all of my friends separately and let them know what happened, just in case. Later that week, I started receiving several DMs from various accounts, all without profile pictures or posts. Eventually I gave in and responded to one, asserting that the relationship was over and that I didn't want to hear from him again. I blocked the accounts immediately afterwards. As time went on without hearing a word in weeks, I figured I had reached the end of the situation. Until one morning, while I walked to my car, I noticed something dangling around the handle of my car door. It was a necklace I had gave him. He had only picked me up once from my house before. The thought of him driving to my house about a half hour from his place earlier that night freaked me out. I was shaken up for a while. It was by no means an expensive necklace, and I had the exact same one, but I kept pushing it. I thought maybe it was his way of acknowledging that we were done. 2 months later, I was working my job at a small boutique near my house. I was used to answering the phone several times a day, so when the phone rang, I thought nothing of it. But when I picked up, I immediately recognized his voice. He started rambling about wanting a sweatshirt back, but I hung up before he could finish. That was the last time I would ever tell someone I was dating where I worked. I was completely losing it at this point, especially considering he never called me at work while we were together. I don't even know how he knew I was working at that day or time. I told my sister the situation, and she, being very protective, decided to message him herself. She told him to leave me alone and even offered to give him back the sweatshirt for me. He refused and insisted on meeting up with me in person to get it. When it became abundantly clear that he didn't actually want the sweatshirt back, she threatened him with the PPO, to which he never responded. That was the last time I heard from him. I want to hear everyone's thoughts on this. I've been checking my area's Craigslist, and lo and behold, I saw a really weird post in my area in the missing connections section. The post said, "Your mother is in Hawaii," which on my Facebook, I have a profile pic of me in Hawaii with a Hawaii hat. Then the post said, "Your birthday is blank on the blank," which of course was my birthday. Then the post said, "This is your big sister." I'm very, very, very confused. Am I crazy? Is this just a coincidence? Is the big sister the accomplice? Did they hack my Wi-Fi? I mentioned down in the comments that I changed my Wi-Fi password because there were 2 unknown devices connected. What the hell is going on? It all started when I moved into our new house and started up a gym membership. I'm 5'3" and look pretty young for my age. Somebody the other day knocked and asked if my mother was home. Cringe, so I look like a little girl, I'm told. So one night at the gym, I see this weird guy staring at me and sort of following me around. He looked crazy, like a shell-shocked soldier. He was a very socially awkward, quiet, smart-looking kind of guy. He had a huge build too, probably like 6'4" and a bodybuilder type. So then he eventually passed by the machine I was on and looked directly at me, almost like he was trying to read me. It was like a deer in the headlights. My gut just told me I was in trouble. So I get up and head for the lockers, and no surprise, he headed for the men's. I made myself literally sit in that locker room for 20 minutes to make sure that we would not leave at the same time. I peer out of the locker room, don't see him, and start heading for the exit. This guy literally pops out of nowhere and heads out behind me. At this point, I'm now accepting the challenge. Stupid, I know. I slow down and stare at him with the most serious deadlock stare I can muster up. He walks to his car and I walk to mine, staring at each other the entire time. I stand there in front of my car and stare, and he slides into his car. He then lowers his head and gives me the most bone-chilling, evil-eyed stare anyone had ever given me. It kind of made me chuckle. I waited for him to drive off. So then I figured I lost him and started driving home. I live in a very small town with neighborhoods with dead-end cul-de-sacs. So, right before I turn into my neighborhood, this SUV drives up behind me on my tail all aggressively. I know he followed me home after that, but I have no idea how he was so stealthy. I'm pretty sure this guy is ex-military, just by his demeanor, age 36 or so, his SUV, and just everything screamed ex-military. 3 days go by and my husband leaves for work. I'm upstairs in bed and I hear my front door open. Someone just walked into my house. My heart stopped. I had no idea what was going on. I creep out of my room and see all 3 of my kids are fast asleep. I walk over to one of their rooms and look out the window to the street. My heart does that dropping thing again. A car was parked directly in front of my house that I don't recognize. It was an old, unmarked car that was parked at a very unusual diagonal angle, and it was running. I started stomping on my ceiling and I start waving my hands at the car to threaten it. It races off and leaves whoever is in my house. Then, all of a sudden, I see this man emerge from under the window with his face completely covered. He was walking away with a quickness. But get this, he had the same build as the guy from the gym. It is just unmistakable. He's huge, and I've never seen dudes this big. At first, I thought it was an unrelated robbery, but statistically, they don't come back to the scene if caught. And he didn't take anything downstairs. And my laptop was right downstairs. My husband has seen that car apparently once after that 3 weeks later, and it sped off when he walked outside. My brother-in-law came to visit a couple of weeks ago and had to park around the corner. He told me he saw a guy walking by the house and looking very suspicious. When I asked for his description, he said some guy with a big build. I'm creeped out. I don't know what's going to happen.
I grew up in the Kentish countryside in the 1980s, and I had this mate called Gordon who was properly obsessed with the army and all that stuff, and ever since I could remember, he'd been a military nut. He was the type of kid who played with little plastic army men, collected action dolls, and spent his pocket money at the wartime memorabilia shop in town. He had Airfix model kits of 1,000 different tanks and planes that he meticulously glued together in paint. And I tried to make a couple of kits one time and just got glue everywhere, and my paint applications would have made a Warhammer fan weep. Gordon's grandpa Derek was a World War II veteran. He lived alone in a little ground floor flat, and Gordon and I would often go visit the old man on a weekend. He was a genuinely lovely fella. Imagine the classic loving grandpa archetype, and that was basically him. My parents and Gordon's parents were friends, and my nan and granddad were friends with Gordon's grandpa Derek, and so it was never considered strange that Gordon would bring his friends over to visit Grandpa Derek, especially me. Now don't worry, this doesn't end with Grandpa Derek being outed as some nunce or anything. He was a lovely man, right up until his death in a nursing home in the 90s. Alzheimer's is a real bummer. Now, the issue, you see, was with Gordon. It was pretty obvious, even to me as a kid, that Grandpa Derek didn't really like talking about his time in World War II. He especially didn't like how excitable and bloodthirsty Gordon would get when he asked his grandpa repeatedly about those he'd killed. I'm sure Grandpa Derek had lots of thoughts about his grandson's idolation of the war, but he was a loving grandpa who didn't want to upset a little kid, so he just smiled and told whatever stories his PTSD would allow. When the event I'm going to talk about happened, Gordon and I were maybe 10. It was a Saturday, and we'd been to visit Grandpa Derek along with our third friend, Eugene. Eugene wasn't one of Gordon's preferred friends. He kind of tagged along with us and complained about everything, and I understood why Gordon didn't like him, but I did. Gordon was in the mood with me that day for letting Eugene hang out with us, but after we'd visited Grandpa Derek, he kind of perked up. I had no idea why, but I knew that it had something to do with the fact that he disappeared off into the storage room in Grandpa Derek's flat while we were there. After Grandpa Derek's, Gordon led us out into the woods to play. We had a sort of tree fort thing that we were building there that summer, and this was the first time showing Eugene. Eugene whined and moaned all the way through the undergrowth, of course, complaining about brambles and thorns and branches and midges and pine cones. When we got there and he saw our cool fort, Eugene got excited and we played soldiers for a bit. Of course it was soldiers. Gordon only ever wanted to play soldiers, rampaging through the forest with stick guns, pretending to kill each other in a myriad of gruesome ways. And after a while, Gordon called us over and asked if we wanted to see something cool. Of course we did. So he grabbed his backpack, reached into it, and produced 2 items that forever changed my life. One was a gun, which I would later discover was a Luger P08, and the other was a grenade. There were always stories in the news about kids finding live grenades in fields or things like that, and we'd even have an assembly about it when a guy had found one near us. Even if we hadn't, though, I would have recognized what it was because Gordon was so obsessed with war and weaponry, so I also immediately recognized the fact that it was missing the pin. I was concerned that this meant that the grenade was live and dangerous. Eugene wasn't just concerned. In that moment, he was petrified. He pointed at the grenade and actually shrieked at Gordon that it was going to explode at any moment, and that Gordon had no idea how dangerous that thing was that he held. He could kill all of us with it. And I'll never forget the smile that crept over Gordon's face. "I know," he said. Eugene and I looked at each other, exchanging a silent agreement not to make any sudden moves. Gordon carefully tucked the pistol into his jacket pocket and gripped the grenade. "If I press this lever, it'll blow us all up," he said. Now, being the voice of reason, I told him, maybe don't do that, and Eugene just yelled something else. Gordon was looking wistful, talking about how if we blew up, we'd be heroes, dying heroically in battle, he said. I pointed out that it's only a battle if there's an enemy, that it would just be us dying in a stupid accident. Eugene was starting to get frantic, and I could see him glancing over his shoulder like he was getting ready to run. I was genuinely terrified that if he did, Gordon would throw the grenade and just blow us all up. "Please, Gordon," I said. And Gordon gripped the grenade tighter, and now he was talking about honoring his Grandpa Derek's fight. What? I thought. This kid was mental. And I told him as much, and Gordon just stared at me and stepped forward menacingly. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the grenade out of his hand and flung it, and then I braced myself for impact. Silence. We all stood there frozen for a moment, and then Gordon started laughing like a maniac. "It was a model. It's fake." I stared at him, absolutely astounded and speechless. The whole thing had been a prank. Serious, po-faced Gordon had pretended that he was going to kill us all as a prank. That was awesome. I started laughing too. Eugene didn't really see the funny side, but even he was keeping his calm. I think we were both just relieved that our friend wasn't actually mental and we weren't going to die. I shoved Gordon in the shoulder, kind of just good-naturedly, and he laughed and sort of stumbled backwards. Something fell from his jacket pocket, and I heard the clunk of metal, then a loud, echoing bang that made my ears immediately ring. Gordon's face went white. Eugene crumpled to the ground, almost in slow motion. I turned to look at him, mouth agape. I could see a bloody wound on his forehead. When I had shoved Gordon, the pistol he'd stolen from his grandfather, Derek, had fallen out of his jacket pocket and hit a rock. And as I said, we later found out it was a Luger P08. Grandpa Derek had kept it ever since the war. He thought it was unloaded and non-functional, so he said anyway, but it turned out it must have just been jammed or hadn't been used in a while. Hitting the rock caused it to discharge, and the angle that it fell meant that it shot Eugene right square in the middle of his forehead. And shockingly, Eugene was fine. The wound looked nasty, but in actual fact, the bullet had grazed him and ricocheted off the hard, bony part of his forehead. It turns out it can actually be quite hard to lethally shoot someone in the head, but nevertheless, Eugene was incredibly lucky here. It also turned him into the coolest boy in school, a reputation he maintained from then on. And we're still friends to this day, old geezers ourselves now, I guess, and Gene often jokes that being shot in the head as a kid was the best thing that ever happened to him. Grandpa Derek managed to avoid any real trouble for owning that gun. This was quite a while before UK gun laws became a lot stricter, so he got away with a bit of a telling off from the Rosers and his daughter, Gordon's mom. Gordon was in the absolute doghouse, though. His parents made him get rid of all of his military models and toys, and they banned us from visiting Grandpa Derek without adult supervision, mostly for Grandpa Derek's protection, really. Thankfully, things ended up okay, and Gordon grew up to become normal, a well-rounded adult, and the incident and the punishment absolutely put him off any and all interest in the military, though, and the kid who always insisted that he was going to grow up to be a soldier ended up as a manager at Sainsbury's. Gene and I still keep in touch with him, and Gene takes great delight in never letting Gordon live down the time that he shot him in the head. I had a friend in high school who very nearly ruined my life. Their name was Leo, and they were smart. Genius-level smart. Too smart for his own good, really, which is why I got bored and did things to amuse himself. I hadn't really known him coming up through middle school and most of high school. I was kind of an average, normal kid who was decently okay at school and decently good at football and baseball. Most of my buddies were more jock types, and Leo was a quiet, smart kid who I always just figured was a band geek or a theater kid. Well, he was certainly theatrical anyway. One day in junior year, he just walked up to me, introduced himself, and told me that he was going to become my new best pal. I was kind of amused by this, and I'm a pretty easygoing and placid fella, so I sort of say, sure, why not? From then on, we spent the next year just hanging out, playing video games, going to the mall, fishing, just normal stuff that kids in the 2010s would do. I grew to really like this Leo guy, and he was a bit strange and mysterious, but it didn't really bother me. We'd never hang out at his house, and I never met his family or knew anything about them. He told me he had a younger brother who died, but I later found out that wasn't even true. He had an older sister who was alive. And that was the first weird thing about Leo. Almost everything he told me during the few months that we were friends was some lie. Just completely made up, but in a meaningless way. He told me he lived in one part of town. It turned out to be another. Not for any possible reason either, it just was a part of him amusing himself, I guess. I have no way of knowing exactly the extent of how many lies he told me in that time, but knowing what I know, I'm pretty sure everything he said had a degree of untruth to it. And like I said, Leo would get bored and do kind of insane things just to amuse himself. When all of this was over, he confessed to me that, at first, he wanted to see if he could befriend someone and sustain acting like a completely different person to them. Why? Well, he would just say that he was bored. And if this was the extent of it, then it would be a pretty creepy and pointless but ultimately harmless thing. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. I discovered the following through hindsight, so bear in mind that I didn't know any of this was happening at the time. His project was to steal something from my house every time he visited. It was always something meaningless that we wouldn't notice was gone or wouldn't assume had been stolen. A bottle of bleach, a ceramic banana, a small ornament for my Gram's bedroom. My grandma lived with us when I was a high schooler. A pill from a prescription bottle. Various other things I forget because they were so insignificant. I only know about it because Leo presented them all to me one day. You'll see. His penultimate game was to convince me to be afraid of him. We were in senior year by this point, and he did this by repeatedly dropping hints that he was a serial killer. I didn't work out what some of this meant at the time. He'd tell me that he enjoyed herding a neighborhood cat, or casually let slip that he'd been following a woman in the dark. And then he started referring to his trophies, and when I asked about them, he became coy and mysterious. And this is when I kind of stopped enjoying hanging out with Leo. I gradually started to drift away from him, and we went on with our lives. Then his final game began. One day I was minding my own business, happily working away in math class when I get called to the office. I had no idea why, of course, so my first thought was something bad had happened at home. This made me anxious and a bit jumpy, which really didn't help, and when I got there, the principal and her secretary were waiting for me, along with a member of the security team. They told me they needed to search my bag and my locker, and to this day I have no idea if they were really allowed to do this, but I had no reason to deny them. First, I emptied out my school bag. Nothing weird to note here, just some books and a pair of gym socks. I remember the principal and the security guard giving each other an odd look. I didn't even think to ask what was going on. I was still generally shell-shocked. Next, they marched me to my locker. They opened it up and searched through everything and again found nothing. And now I finally asked what was up. Sternly, the principal told me that they'd received reports from multiple students about me. Apparently, I'd been talking about a hit list and had confided in a few kids that I had a locker full of firearms at school. Now, of course, all of this was nonsense, and the accusations made me freak out. I broke down in tears there in the hallway. I guess my reaction was so severe that they believed me because the secretary even took me back to the office and made me some tea. I asked who'd accused me because they must be trying to frame me for some reason. The secretary stressed that she couldn't tell me anything, but that it had come from multiple students. And I was so confused. Again, let me remind you that I had no idea about Leo's games at this point. At most, I just thought that he was an unsettling weirdo. A week or so later, I got an apology from the school. They were pretty brash about it, but they said that after further investigation, it turned out that the accusation against me was not credible, and that the students themselves had been misled and thought that they were helping. This last part, in particular, made me extra suspicious and curious, but I was so relieved not to be under suspicion that I just let everything drop. I only found out the truth of everything after graduation. I just started college away in a different state. I had no idea where Leo had gone away to college, and I didn't care to know. I'd always suspected he had something to do with the accusations against me. I'm sure he deliberately waited until we'd gone our separate ways, and he couldn't be traced before emailing him. And like I said before, I was a placid and easygoing kid, but I think I would have kicked the crap out of Leo over this if I'd been able to. I got an email. He sent it to my private college email address, of course, just to flex to show that he could track me down, I'm sure. And that's when he told me the truth about everything, or what I'm supposed to believe is the truth anyway. All the random, meaningless lies he told me, compared to what the truth actually was. A whole bunch of things that were just utterly meaningless. And next, he revealed all the things that he'd stolen from my house. He took in a photograph of all the items. It had a copy of that day's newspaper in the picture, too. Another pathetic little flex, I guess. I'm sure he thought it made him seem cool and sinister that he kept all those items. To me, it just seemed pathetic. The idea of him transporting all this crap to his new life away at college just felt so sad to me. And then he went on and on about the serial killer stuff, how he'd been trying to scare me and hoped it had worked. And I guess it sort of had, now. And then finally he explained how he managed to convince a bunch of students I was going to do something terrible at school. How he'd managed to work things so that nobody knew the rumors came from him, and everybody involved genuinely thought that they were doing good by reporting me. Then he made sure to add that it was also his doing when I'd been found innocent, because he didn't want me to suffer from being falsely accused. He just wanted me to know that he could. And when I think about it, that's true. It could have been so much worse. If someone sets their mind to ruining you, there's a good chance that they can do some degree, especially when you're a kid and can't necessarily work out how to fight back. If Leo had wanted to make things a lot worse for me back then, he probably could have, because he was literally bored. And that's why I decided not to even reply to his email. Let him get it out of his system and forget me. And I never did hear from him again. It's been quite a few years now, but anytime something goes wrong for me, I have to wonder. Anytime something happens that I can't explain, my first thoughts go to Leo. Is he back? Is he screwing with me again? Has he thought of another game? I have no idea what became of Leo since he last emailed me, but I hope he's occupied. I really don't want to find out what happens if he ever gets bored enough to remember me again. The worst friend I ever had was a kid called William. I was kind of forced to be his friend, and we were put together at kindergarten because our moms were friends, and William decided that I was going to be his. I don't mean his friend, I mean his. You see, in his eyes, he owned me. I was a walking, talking, living, breathing toy for William's amusement. And what I mean by that is his favorite game was making me cry. We were like 5, and already William knew a dozen ways to pinch, prod, poke, and stab me. And his bullying never got noticed. He was the type who'd reach under the table and pinch you on the soft flesh of your thigh or flick the back of your ear with a rubber band. Because of William, I got a reputation as a crybaby, prone to bursting into tears over nothing. I was too scared of William to tell anyone that he was actually hurting me pretty consistently. Sometimes at recess, he'd make me go behind the school and choke me with my t-shirt collar until I puked. Other times, he would do this burn on my arm, and it felt like the skin was going to split. He pulled my hair out. He just prod me with these pins that he had, and I was known as the clumsy kid who was always breaking his toys or tearing his clothes or tripping and crying. But no. Looking back, it was always William. I wish there was a twist that I could add here. And William was my imaginary friend, but he was very real. And this very real, very unpleasant torment continued throughout elementary school. There had been one blissful moment where William's family decided to move away because his stepdad got a promotion, but then that fell through and I was stuck with my bully and tormentor, and it seemed like it would last forever. The wildest part is that William also seemed to actually like me and enjoyed spending time with me. Over the years, he'd made sure that I had no other friends, so back then, I guess I thought this kind of friendship was normal. Looking back now, it fills me with terror, but back then I genuinely thought William was my friend, and I convinced myself I enjoyed spending time with him in return. I'd invite him over to play most weekends, even though it would inevitably lead to my things getting broken or William somehow getting in trouble with my parents. Occasionally, we would play at William's house. His family was a lot richer than mine. William had a dog, an older sister, and a Nintendo. William would never let me play the Nintendo, but he'd let me watch, always promising that I could get the next turn until inevitably we ran out of time. Another thing William had was bunk beds. This meant on the rare occasion we had a sleepover, it was usually at William's house. Somehow my childish mind would allow itself to be afraid of William at night, so I never wanted to sleep over at his, but occasionally I had no choice because my parents were going away or something. My mom and William's mom were friends, like I said, so William's house was always the first choice if I had to stay overnight somewhere. We were 8 and 9 when this happened. I was the older of us by just a few months, and it was the middle of the night. When I slept over, William let me take that top bunk, and this seemed really exciting to me as someone who didn't have a bunk bed. But later I realized it was because William always slept on the bottom bunk because he was afraid of heights. I woke up to William tugging on my arm. He made me get out of bed and threw water in my face to wake me up. This was typical William fashion. And next he told me we were going to the park. I knew we weren't supposed to go out in the middle of the night, especially not alone at that age, but I really couldn't say no to him. I didn't even have to say anything. He was already reaching to pinch me if I started to protest. Now this was around May, and it was warm out. I didn't mind too much that William made me wear my pajamas to the park even though he'd been allowed to dress, and at least he let me wear shoes. At the park near William's house, there was a really tall jungle gym that William never let us play on because he said it was gay. That night, though, it was the focus of his attention. "Climb to the top," he commanded me. Now, I should point out that this was a children's park in the 90s, so there was minimal lighting, and there was one lamp that made things barely visible, but nowhere near enough light to let us play safely on the equipment at night. William didn't care, though. He wanted me to climb to the top of that jungle gym, and by God, was he going to make me do it. Thankfully, I was a pretty agile kid, and the thought of climbing to the top didn't really bother me, even in the dark. Now I climbed up the netting and onto the top bars, knowing it was far easier than facing William's anger. And when I was at the top, William told me to do a handstand. Now, I say I was agile, but I wasn't Spider-Man. William could hurt me as much as he wanted to. I couldn't do something I couldn't do. He knew it, I guess, because when I said no, he just shrugged and turned away. I lost sight of him in that darkness. And then, something hit me in the head, hard. Pain and light flashed before my eyes, and I stumbled backwards, which of course meant that I fell 12 feet to the ground. I slammed into the ground and just felt myself, for lack of a better words, break. I have no idea how else to describe it. It was like a sudden, sharp, cracking ping through my body, and then nothing. I could taste copper, though, and smell it, too. I could feel a wetness around my cheek. Was I crying already? No. I was bleeding from what I'd later discover was a serious skull fracture. I tried crying out for help, but there was no sound coming out of my mouth. I just let out a few wet gasps. I couldn't even move my head or turn to look. And I heard William walking over to me, though, and then he sat down facing me. Why wasn't he getting help? And he proceeds to say, "See? This is what happens when you don't do what I say." Then my supposed best friend in the world went off on some rant about how I always needed to obey him because it would keep me safe. That if I'd just done a handstand, I wouldn't have fallen off the climbing equipment. I remember him rocking back and forth a little as he talked, like he was just in complete shock. And at first I hoped that was the case, but the more he talked, the more I realized that he was just excited to see me broken, bleeding, and, as far as I knew at that time, dying. And that's when the pain kicked in. This sort of white hotness throughout my whole body, so bad that I can't even recall how it felt if I tried. I remember feeling relief, too. If my legs hurt so much, then I couldn't be paralyzed, right? I still couldn't move, though. Not at all. I was starting to swim in and out of consciousness. Meanwhile, William, 8 years old, let me remind you, kept lecturing me about how this was my fault, how I brought this on myself. And in that moment, I finally realized that William might actually, genuinely, let me die. And nearly a whole hour later, that's how long William waited before going to get help, and I actually believe that he was hoping that I'd die so he somehow wouldn't get in trouble. But he didn't. He had no choice but to go and wake his mom and stepdad. I barely remember the paramedics finally getting there, or the trip to the hospital, or the immediate recovery. What I do remember is the relief that people believed me as soon as I told them everything. It all came out. This years of bullying and torment and torture, how William had forced me to climb up that jungle gym and then throw a rock at my head. The rock had hit me square in the temple and was consistent with that projectile, and I later found out that the doctors had already told my parents that it looked like someone had thrown a rock at me, so I guess they already suspected my friend. I'd suffered a broken arm, 2 broken legs, multiple fractured ribs and vertebrae. I required numerous surgeries and still kind of walk with a limp almost decades later. William's family was responsible for all my medical bills, and still I think my family would have given that kid the death penalty on top of it if they could have. He didn't get sent to juvie or anything, but his mom and stepdad sent him away to some kind of long-term behavioral camp for troubled kids, and apparently he was the youngest kid ever to get sent there. A few years later, William wrote me an apology letter. I didn't even want to read it. My parents let me throw it on a bonfire, and I'm forever grateful to them that they didn't force me to accept his apology, because refusing to do so was an incredibly healing experience for me. I could have never believed his apology was genuine, not after having to lie there bleeding out on the ground as he lectured me about how my fall was my own fault. No, I don't know what became of William, and I don't want to know. This is the first time I've talked about the experience in years, and to me, the best revenge on William is to treat him as an insignificant footnote. But, William, if by some chance you're also a Let's Read listener and you hear this, then I want you to know, you almost killed me.
In the summer of 2015, I worked at a university in a small southern town. I lived a few miles away from campus in a 2-bedroom house with a roommate, and my schedule was pretty rigid. Same routine every day. I went to class in the morning, worked in the afternoon, and got home around 9 p.m. One Thursday night, I arrived home at the usual time and noticed that there was an old pickup truck idling at the yield sign across the street from my house. I didn't know the make or model, but it was beat up, peeling paint, rust, dents. It looked really out of place in our neighborhood. Most people there drove nice modern cars, so this thing stood out like a sore thumb. The streets were deserted. It clearly wasn't waiting for other cars to pass. I thought maybe the driver was just texting or something, but since my roommate wasn't home yet, I didn't want to leave the safety of my own vehicle. I'm a petite woman who doesn't carry pepper spray anymore, so I try to be aware of my surroundings. I pulled into my driveway and just sat there, staring at the truck and waiting for it to leave. Eventually it did. It pulled away slowly and made its way out of the neighborhood toward the main road. When it was out of sight, I went inside, locked the door behind me, and made myself some dinner. By 11 p.m., my roommate still hadn't come home, and I was folding laundry and listening to podcasts in my room. I'd forgotten all about the truck. Suddenly, the lights went out. That spooked me, because normally our power didn't shut off unless there was bad weather. That night was clear as a bell, so I immediately called my roommate and asked where he was. He told me he was already on his way home and would be there in about 5 minutes. Relieved, I just told him to step on it and hung up. No reason to freak out about a power outage, right? He'd be there soon enough, and then we could figure it out together. I walked into the living room to wait for him. Our front door had a little diamond-shaped window in it, which I always hated. I stood on my tiptoes and looked out to see if our neighbor's power was out as well. I was surprised to see that it wasn't. Even the street light near our front yard was still on. Weird. Had I somehow blown a fuse? Just as I considered making a trip to the basement to reset the breakers, I received a text message from my mom. I don't remember what it was about, but it only took me a few seconds to answer it. After I did, I looked out the window again. To my utter shock and surprise, there was a man standing under the streetlight. He hadn't been there before, and I instantly got a bad feeling. He was middle-aged and about 6 feet tall, with a potbelly and little round glasses, unkempt hair, old sneakers. His white t-shirt and blue jeans were filthy. He looked like he'd been working on a car or something. He was mechanic dirty, you know? And he had this awful, smug expression on his face. I had never seen him before. Still in shock at actually seeing someone out there, I didn't move. Luckily, he couldn't see me because the inside of my house was pitch dark. But to my absolute horror, he was headed straight for me. Not walking quickly or with purpose, just kind of casually shuffling toward the house. If someone else were to pass by, they probably wouldn't realize what he was up to. He even glanced around a few times, as if making sure nobody else was watching. Inch by inch, he made his way into the yard. This guy was coming to get me. I was sure of it. I started to shake. I think it's worth mentioning that my dog is very people-oriented, and usually goes bananas when he hears someone outside. This time, he was silent. He had no idea there was a man approaching, even though I was staring at him through the window. When the man was about halfway to the porch, my roommate's car finally rounded the bends and turned onto our street. As soon as those headlights lit him up, the man turned to look and recognized the approaching vehicle. My roommate and I both saw his face. He recognized that car. In his haste to get away, he nearly stepped in front of it and got run over. My roommate swerved into the driveway, scrambled out, and charged into the house. He didn't even speak to me. He just grabbed the axe out of our utility closet and went back outside to confront the man. But the man was gone. We called the police and the power company, and they both sent someone to check things out. The police didn't find anything. The repairman reset the box on the pole near our house. Apparently, the switch had flipped, which is why our house, and only our house, was without electricity. I asked the repairman if there was any way that a person could have been responsible for that, but he didn't give me a straight answer. The following day, we went on a camping trip that lasted all weekend. If the man came back, we never knew. And after that, I refused to be home alone. If my roommate wasn't around when I got off work, I killed time in a local bar until he got back. We both moved away soon after. I never saw the man or the truck again, but sometimes I wonder how long he had been watching our house, and what might have happened if my roommate hadn't been on his way home that night. This happened in 2016 when I was a 17-year-old first-year college student in film school. I'm now 22 female, and my name is Julia. I lived alone in my first ever apartment. It was really small, but I was really proud of my independence. I never felt unsafe in this apartment for several reasons. There were multiple gates in the residence that needed to be opened through a code. Only the people who lived there knew. My door had 3 different locks, and it was right next to the university, so most of the people who lived in the neighborhood were college students. Nothing bad had ever happened in the neighborhood before. I've always been very careful with locking the door when I leave my home. I always check twice. I have slight OCD. So this one time I left to go to class and locked my door, but for some reason, I couldn't get the key out of the lock. It was completely stuck, so when I went to get the caretaker of the building to help me, but he wasn't there and I was getting late for class, I went to class with the key still in the lock. I took off the keychain first, so it wasn't too noticeable. When I got home, the caretaker was back, so he came to help me and we couldn't get it up for 15 minutes, until somehow he did. He told me the lock was damaged, but that I didn't necessarily need to change it if I only locked it once instead of twice. I just said okay, and that was the end of it. I really wasn't worried because of how safe I felt in this building. Fast forward to 2 months later, I was taking out the trash one night around 11 p.m. and while on the phone with my sister, I remember telling her that I was taking out the trash and that I would take a shower afterwards before heading to a party. As I previously said, I always lock the door, even just to take out the trash. Because of my lock being damaged, I only locked it once. When I got back to my apartment, I found the door unlocked, which immediately alarmed me. So I went into the apartment and locked the door immediately with 3 different types of locks. When you walk into my apartment, which is just 215 square feet, you have the main room in front of you and the bathroom door immediately to your left. I had left the bathroom door slightly open, enough so I could see a man in my shower, turning his back to me. Naturally, when I saw this, I tried to open the door and leave as fast as possible. Except, my main lock was damaged from 2 months earlier and I couldn't open it no matter how hard I tried. In this moment, all I could think of was the fact that I had to leave as fast as possible. I jumped out the window without really thinking. I figured it was the only solution, except I live on the 2nd floor, so I completely smashed my ankles in the landing. I started running in whichever way I could, and when I got a little bit further from the building, I looked back and a man was there at my window watching me run away. I thought of 2 possible outcomes. Either the man was going to jump and chase me, and I wouldn't get far with my twisted ankles, or he would get scared of the height and be locked in my apartment. Thankfully, he picked option 2. I went to hide in a bush a little further and called the police, who arrived in just 10 minutes because I live close to the station. I pushed my door open and the man was just sitting there on my couch holding a kitchen knife, waiting for me to come back, like he didn't think I would call the police. They arrested the guy. They also told me how everything had happened. Like I said, it was a very friendly neighborhood with mostly college students, so he got inside the building by other people holding the door for him. He then heard me telling my sister I was going to take a shower, which was why he was waiting in the bathroom for me. He crocheted my lock while I was taking out the trash. He apparently noticed me on the school campus and followed me to my home several times before succeeding in actually coming in. He stayed inside waiting for me because I had recently changed my phone, and the previous one was still on the table, so he thought I didn't have a phone with me to call the police. I don't live there anymore, but after that, to get into the building, we all needed identification proving we lived there. Building IDs were created, and we had to scan them every time, and it was the only way to go inside. Nothing bad happened in the neighborhood after that. It's back to being very peaceful and friendly. My brother didn't leave his room for 3 days, and my parents wouldn't let me check on him. On the third night Jacob didn't come out of his room, I got the courage to bring it up to my mom. "People don't sleep for this long," I said. She was cooking a casserole, the 6th one this week. We were running out of fridge space for the leftovers, but she kept making more. I would watch her from the corner of the kitchen, her posture curved and her newly grayed hair hanging over the food. I walked over and tugged at her sleeve, but she didn't respond. She was slathering butter on the top crust. "Mom," I said, "did you hear me?" "He needs his strength," she said. "We can't be bothering him." Before I could say anything, Dad walked in. His eyes were red and swollen, but he was smiling, and he had 3 cans of Coke in his hands. "I'm starving," he said. I still have the taste of that horrible cafeteria food in my mouth. "You would think hospitals had good food for how much money they make," Mom said. "I know, right?" Dad said. He placed the Cokes on the counter. Mom didn't want us to go near Jacob's room, but I was getting worried. I peered out from the kitchen. His room hung at the end of the hallway like an abandoned lighthouse, the only sign of life being the New York Yankees poster taped to his door. Near the ground, there was a small sliver of space to see if he had turned on his lights. It was still dark, as it had been for the last 3 days. I turned back to Mom. "Shouldn't we check on him?" I asked. "I don't know why places like Wendy's or Burger King don't put up little shops in hospitals," Dad went on. "I mean, you have hundreds of people who are stuck there for days on end. That's consistent business." "It's all politics," Mom said. "They sign these big contracts that are impossible to break." Right, that makes sense, right. Dad was standing next to Mom now, his face inches from the casserole, and he took a long sniff. "Ah," he said, "smells great." "Do you want some of the leftovers while this finishes in the oven?" she asked. "I think we still have some from yesterday. Wasn't the spinach and ricotta one good?" "Very good. Very, very good," he said. "I literally couldn't stop eating it." "Jacob's gonna devour these when he gets the appetite," Mom said. I turned back and took a step into the hallway. The distance between me and his room felt long and narrow, like a high wire. When I got away from the casserole smell, I hit a different smell. It reminded me of old gym socks. Even with Mom's array of candles and incense, I could still smell it. It cut through everything. The last time I saw Jacob was on the drive home from his treatment. His face was a pale green and his eyes kept rolling back. Mom said I had to keep talking to him to keep his focus. I told him about my friends from school and how they kept pranking the teacher by putting tacks on her chair. It wasn't true. I actually just saw it on a TV show once, but I was running out of material. It really didn't matter though. Jacob didn't even respond. All he did was cough. Pink drool was spilling out onto his t-shirt. "Danny," Mom said, "why don't you heat up some of those leftovers? We're all craving that spinach and ricotta casserole." "I can't stop thinking about it," Dad said. "I was literally dreaming about it last night." I ignored them. I kept my focus on my brother's door. I didn't dream about the casserole like Dad. I kept having a different dream. My brother was running into my room and flicking my ear. It was a game we used to play. We would tiptoe up to each other's door and then wait for our moment. Then the attacker ran in and got 1 or 2 good flicks before retreating. In my dream, though, Jacob would run in and flick me, but I wouldn't move. I just stood there. He would flick and laugh, then flick some more sometimes. Sometimes he would flick so hard my ear flew off. "Earth to Danny," Dad said, snapping his fingers in my face. He was standing in front of me, blocking my view of Jacob's door. "Do you mind heating up 4 portions of the casserole in case Jacob wants some? We're going to eat that before this next casserole because we want to make sure Jacob's able to try it, because in my opinion, it was definitely one of your mom's best." I looked up at him and held my eye contact. I couldn't say what I was thinking, so I wanted Dad to feel it. Maybe if I stared long enough, my feelings would translate. But Dad only looked at me for a moment and then walked away. In that brief connection, though, I saw something I didn't want to see. It was like staring down the tunnel of the world's deepest well. "Come on now," he said. He grabbed my shoulders and turned me around. His voice got heavier. "You're going to want to heat up each piece individually, because if you do, all of them at once, then you won't get the heat through the pieces. You'll probably have a couple that are too hot and others that are too cold. And then Jacob won't get the full picture of how good these casseroles are." Dad let go of my shoulders and walked ahead of me, but I stayed in the hallway a moment longer. I turned to look at my brother's door one last time. I fantasized about walking up to it and going inside, but I was afraid Mom would yell at me. Besides, I never liked going in there. He had a puke bucket next to his bed, which always had pink splatters in it, and there were always clumps of hair on his pillows. Back before the last hospital visit, Mom would make me go in there and talk to him. But I always made up some excuse, like that I had a cold and I didn't want to get him more sick. But when I couldn't get out of it, I would stay in there for a few minutes and watch him try to breathe. I would tell him about some TV episode I saw, then run back to my room. I looked up. I thought I was walking back to the kitchen, but I was moving toward the door. I didn't want to, but I kept moving, like my limbs were controlled by a puppeteer. I put my hand on the doorknob, and I turned it. The gym sock smell filled my head like helium. Through the darkness, I could make out a sliver of my brother's face. The soft evening light fell on him, and his eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. His arms were straight as rulers, and his fingers curled like a blooming rose. I walked to the side of his bed. Red spit fell off his lips. He looked like a frowning clown. I flicked his ear, and it was hard. I walked out and closed the door behind me. As I walked back, I seemed to forget what the inside of his room looked like. With the door closed, I wondered what he was doing. Jacob could be doing jumping jacks, or reading comic books, or plotting his next ear flick attack. When I walked into the kitchen, I heated up 4 plates of spinach and ricotta casserole. When they were done, I wrapped Jacob's plate in aluminum foil and put it in the oven to keep warm. Then Mom, Dad, and I sat in the dining room and we ate in silence. I've been working as a food delivery driver for about 8 months now. With how my contract works, I need at least 3 evening shifts, with 2 of those being between Friday and Sunday. I don't really mind working in the evenings since it has a nice vibe to it, being really calm. Just throw on some headphones and a good playlist or podcast and you're good. Plus, I never work for more than 4.5 hours on end since I work on an e-bike, so I can't do longer shifts without my battery dying. Keeping in mind, the bike needs to take me home as well. Apart from some stupid encounters I've had with teenagers trying to be funny in front of their friends, like biking after me and asking me for food or pretending to be the customer, I've never had anything creepy happen to me. That was until a few weeks ago. It was a Thursday evening. I had a shift from 5:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Where I live, us delivery drivers get paid per hour instead of per delivery. This has its advantages and disadvantages. One of the disadvantages is that we can't decline orders on our own ends. If we, for whatever reason, can't take an order, we need to talk with the company we work for. So whatever trip is thrown at us, we have to take. Up until this point, I'd been having good, close-by deliveries from nice local restaurants. None of the journeys were to faraway places, which was good. The weather was fine, it was cold, but if you layer yourself well enough, it's not that bad as long as it just doesn't rain, which luckily it didn't. It was around 8:15 p.m. when I got a McDonald's order. The customer lived around 12 minutes away from the restaurant, which wasn't ideal, but it was fine since I only had lost 1 stripe of battery so far. The location it was going to was also a good one, since the only time I'd need to get off the bike lane was to cross roads. Other than that, it was all bike lanes. I picked up the order after waiting for around 15 minutes. I got back onto my bike, chose a playlist, and made my way over to this customer. The streets were pretty quiet, setting the vibe. As I got closer to the customer's house, I made my way onto the sidewalk and cycled slowly, trying to find the house number, which can be a pain at night. I eventually did and locked my bike up. I walked over to the door and knocked. After a few seconds, I heard commotion and placed my bag down, taking out the food. The door opened and a lady greeted me with a smile. After handing her the food and telling her to enjoy it, she thanked me, and after giving me a tip, closed the door back up. I got back onto the bike and unlocked it. I had been charging my phone with my power bank, but wanted to take the charger off since my phone was now full enough, and dealing with the wire sticking out of my jacket pocket can be a hassle when taking off and putting back on my backpack. However, I always feel awkward and watched, staying in the front yard for too long, especially when they have those doorbell cameras, so I made my way over to a small alleyway close to the house. As I turned back off my bike, I took out my power bank to turn it off. Then I changed my playlist, and as I was putting the power bank back into my pocket, I heard slow footsteps creeping closer to me from behind. Now, this alleyway I was standing in was pretty narrow and small, so I was probably blocking it. I quickly moved and got off my bike, holding it close to me as I pressed it myself onto the wall. I excused myself and made a gesture for the person to pass. Instead of thanking me and walking on, the person just kept standing there. This is when I looked up. I was met with a tall, skinny lady standing just a few inches away. Her face was slim and her long hair came to rest on her shoulders. Her face looked white and she looked like a heroin addict. She looked me dead in the eye without any expression and was breathing through her mouth. She was wearing brown jeans and a blue hoodie with the hoodie on. "Can I help you?" I asked after painful moments of silence. She looked at me for a few more seconds and said, "You have my food." I froze. Now in our app system, there is no way to actually confirm that the customer was the right one since we don't have any security codes to ask. Since I was busy with my power bank, I hadn't clicked finished order yet. I checked my phone and decided to ask the lady questions about the order. "Oh, I think another driver has your food. I just delivered to someone else," I said with a smile. "Where did you order from?" If she was right, I would have been able to help her easily with getting a refund. However, she just stared at me, her expressionless face turning into a hard, ugly glare. "No," she said loudly. "That was my food," she stated. Again, I tried to reason with her, asking for her name and what food she had ordered. "I'm just trying to help you, ma'am. Check your app. The app should tell you how far the driver is." To this, she stepped back and pointed her hand at me. "My food. I need my food." At this point, I figured she must be homeless and hungry. "I have food if you want," I said. Now, I always keep snacks on me in case I have to wait long for an order to get ready or have no orders come in for a bit. We wait a lot since we can't turn down orders for taking too long to be made. My go-to work snacks are protein granola bars. They're easy to keep since they don't take up much space and you can eat them fast. I decided to give her a box and maybe she'd be satisfied. I took one out of my backpack and handed it to her. She took it from me, damn near snatching it out of my grip, and stepped closer. "I want my food," she stated sternly, her glare sharp. I let out a breath, getting really creeped out now, and once again asked her to check her app or give me her name. The name she put up with her so-called order. She took a big breath, and before I could say anything else, she exhaled and screamed bloody murder, making me flinch and press myself onto the wall. In the process, I accidentally moved my bike's throttle. This thing alone doesn't get around past 4 kilometers per hour. I had some struggle but eventually got on the bike and pedaled away, the lady still screaming behind me. I got to a fence that prevented cars from coming in and had to slow down a bit. This was enough time for the lady to catch up and even grab onto the back of my bike. I let out a yelp as I could feel her try to push me. I also heard something scrape the wall next to me. I didn't want to look and instead put my bike on a higher assist mode, which I normally never do and always keep on 2 or 3 to spare battery life, pedaling like my life depended on it as I got past the fences. I then put it even higher and cycled away. I could hear the lady yelling and calling me a food thief. As I glanced back, she held the box of granola bars above her head and threw them at me. They landed about a meter away from me. I also noticed what was causing that scraping noise, as she was holding a knife in her hand. I focused back on the road and cycled away, hearing the lady still screaming, yelling, and trying to run after me. Eventually, I went back to the app and finally clicked finished order. hoping to get a new one since I didn't want to aimlessly cycle around in fear of running into her, since I thought she might know all the shortcuts. I got a new order from a kebab place nearby, around 8 minutes away. This place was one I got sent to a lot, and the owner was very friendly, always asking us drivers if we wanted something to eat or drink and saying it was on the house. I got there and was slightly out of breath. He asked me what happened, gave me some water to drink, and helped me calm down, then gave me some food. After I told him, he talked to the company, saying I was in no state to keep doing deliveries. My work agreed to allow me to end my shift earlier. One of my co-workers came for the pickup, and since this delivery was just outside of city center, I biked back with him to the city, where it was still busy, and went on home after that. I'm very glad for the timing of that order, my co-worker, and for the owner of the kebab store. I don't even want to know what that lady would have done to me if she had successfully pulled me off my bike. So I had this boss, who I'll call Mike, and he had come to fill in for a few months while my regular boss was on maternity leave. He was pretty amazing. He inspired me to work harder and even ended up promoting me. The two of us and a third employee that I'll call James were always working shifts together. It was fun, just laughing and kicking ass because we all had a similar sense of humor, and James and I were definitely the best employees there. After Mike's time to fill in was over, James and I were super bummed because he was seriously the best manager. He was fair and rewarded hard work and truly cared about employee satisfaction. Plus, he just made everything fun, even though we were working harder. We both looked up to Mike as a manager and as a human being. We had the utmost respect for him, and we vowed to keep in touch when we parted ways. Well, fast forward a year or so, James and I ended up dating. Kept in touch with Mike, and he was so happy we ended up together because he thought we were both great people who deserved each other. We saw Mike a few more times and kept in touch over the years through social media. When James proposed, and we started planning our wedding, we knew we wanted Mike to be in it. He was part of our trio back before James and I even knew we would be together, and the three of us had a bond. We asked him to read something during the ceremony, and he accepted, expressing how honored he felt. Well, when it got to the day of the wedding, Mike was nowhere to be seen. We kept calling him as the ceremony was quickly approaching, and finally, James got a hold of him. Mike told him that he couldn't get out of work and wouldn't be able to make it. We were both taken aback a little because the Mike we knew and looked up to would never bail like this, not even let us know. We figured there had to be some reasonable explanation and were pretty disappointed, but the wedding had to go on. We had James' niece do the reading, even though Mike's name was printed in the program. Well, fast forward again, a few more years. We had only spoken to Mike a handful of times since the wedding, but he had also taken the time to write me a beautiful, lengthy recommendation letter in that time period. There were no hard feelings about the wedding, and James and I still shared the highest of opinions of our friend. Then Mike kind of disappeared off of social media, and the next time we tried calling him, his phone number had changed. James and I exchanged sentiments of concern and hoped he was doing okay, but it didn't go much past that. One day, James got a random call from a number that wasn't in his contact list. He answered it, and it turned out to be Mike, so he put it on speakerphone so I could say hello too. We had our brief pleasantries, but then Mike got into the reason for this call. He wanted to know if he could stay with us for a day or two. My initial reaction was, of course, but James shot at me a sharp look, so I added, well, let us discuss it and we'll call you back. Before concluding the call, James inquired about what was going on. Mike said he had been living with his father to take care of him because he was terminally ill, that he couldn't stay there another night because he checked the camera footage in their home and seen his dad on tape, standing over him with a knife while he slept. When the call was ended, James said he thought something was off. I didn't really get why he'd instantly be that suspicious. I mean, the story was insane and all, but it was Mike. James said something like, we haven't heard from him in forever, and now he's calling us for a favor. He lives 2 hours away, and we're the ones he calls? Why wouldn't he seek the help of someone closer? He has family in the area, too. I agreed that it was all odd, and it definitely conjured up a lot of questions, including why there were even cameras inside their house, but I still didn't like the idea of leaving Mike hanging if he was truly out of options. I told James we should call back and probe a little more. When we called back, James asked if it wouldn't be easier to have someone closer help him out and asked about family in the area. Mike gave a vague explanation of why everyone in his life had turned against him. Then, with the most mopey, disappointed voice, he said it was okay if we couldn't help, that he understood what was going on and wouldn't bother us anymore. James and I looked at each other and said we'd call him right back. We quickly discussed that this was all very strange, but that he had to be pretty desperate to contact us for help. We acknowledged that his little bit about understanding if we were unable to help was meant to manipulate us, and we felt conflicted about everything, but ultimately decided a few days couldn't hurt. We called him back, told him that he could come, and figured we'd give him the address and that would be that. But he said he no longer had a vehicle and would need to be picked up. We asked about catching an Uber, and he said he had no money he could access at the moment, which we didn't pry him on. It was getting late, and it was a long drive to his location, so we asked if he had anywhere to stay for that night, and we could make the trip in the morning. He said he'd just sleep on a park bench or something, which, again, we knew was meant to manipulate us, but we didn't cave in on that one. We asked where we should pick him up the following day, and he gave us his dad's address. Immediately after we got off the phone, we were like, what the fuck has been going on with Mike that has ostracized him from all his friends and family and caused him to lose his car? He had been making 4x our salary when we first all met and had a brand new car. Now he didn't even have money for an Uber. We went and picked him up the next day, and I got out and ran up and gave him a hug. He seemed oddly unresponsive to my affection, so I just shrugged it off and showed him to the front passenger seat where I'd been sitting. He was super tall, so I let him sit up there and I hopped in the back. When we got back to our house, we showed him to our guest room and he put his things down, and then immediately asked if we could take him to the grocery store. James said he was done driving for the day, so I'd take him, but commented that I thought he didn't have any money on him. He told me he had food stamps, which there's no way he could have qualified for with his old job, so I know something was up. But I wasn't going to dig into the personal details of his finances, so I just logged it into my mind and kept my mouth shut. You might be thinking it just sounds like someone who fell on hard times, and that was basically Mike's story as well. But it was just very vague in important areas and full of story after story about people that seemed determined to destroy him for no known reason whatsoever. 1 or 2 bad eggs is believable, but no one is the innocent victim in every scenario. He was telling us that he had no idea why his life had fallen apart and why those close to him seemed to turn on him out of nowhere, or why so many people were out to get him without seeming to have any motivation. 2 nights turned into a week, and finally James asked Mike what his plan was. Mike acted hurt and said he'd be gone by the morning. We told him he didn't need to leave immediately, but we'd like to have some kind of an idea of his plan for going forward. That night in bed, James and I discussed it and decided we'd tell Mike that he could stay for as long as he needed if he wanted to help out around the house and keep his room relatively clean, because it contained several antique items of James' mother's. We were also going to ask him to help us with some business decisions, as Mike had claimed to have been a totally self-made successful entrepreneur before his streak of bad luck, series of unfortunate events, and I had recently been laid off. We presented our offer the next day, and Mike excitedly accepted. We thought it was going to be a rewarding trade-off for all parties. Now, this isn't a story about my marriage, so I'm not going to go too far into wealth of problems James and I had, but a little info will be necessary. James was highly critical of me and often talked down to me and seemed to have nothing but negative opinions. I wasn't perfect, but I wanted to be loved and worked my ass off for James' approval. I was constantly trying to make him happy, but no matter what I did, I would fail in his eyes. After a few weeks, Mike clearly started to see the cracks in the marriage, despite the fact that James toned it down in Mike's presence. Trying to be a good wife, I acted like all was fine in front of Mike and never mentioned any dissatisfaction in my marriage. Mike and I started to spend a lot of time alone in our entrepreneurial pursuits. He was supposed to be teaching me the tricks of the trade within several avenues of making money, but kept coming out with little success. He had excuses and explanations for why his wisdom didn't seem to be progressing us forward at all. But he was someone I greatly looked up to as a professional and a friend, so I just believed that it would all pay off soon, like he said. After living together for weeks, enough talking among all of us had been done to start noticing weird contradictions to many of the things Mike had told us, but he always worded things in a way that left a slight amount of room for doubt if you were to question any of it. There was never a way to straight up catch him in a lie. Mike also wasn't fulfilling his end of our deal at home and kept saying he'd take his turn to do the dishes and such, but probably only did it once or twice, and he completely trashed the guest room. Not only were there garbage everywhere, but he'd bring in food and drinks and they'd be lost in the sea of clothes and trash, and we could smell things rotting. There was a melted tub of ice cream sitting on the bedside table for weeks. I didn't care as much as James did, and I suggested we just remove his mom's things from the room, but I did agree that it was disrespectful. Meanwhile, things were getting more and more icy with James and me, and one day, when I was out with Mike on a job, I broke down in tears about how much I was hurting about how James treated me. Mike offered words of comfort and reluctantly admitted that he picked up on how mean James could be to me and said he was very sorry and that I didn't deserve it. Mike having been possibly the only witness I have ever had to what I had been going through in my marriage, this was amazingly validating. Mike agreed that it was incredibly unjustified, but made me promise not to tell James that he'd said anything because he didn't want to appear like he was taking sides. The next day, Mike had once again volunteered to take a turn doing the dishes, so I didn't do them. I hate doing dishes and happily left them for Mike when he assured me he'd handle it. Well, Mike got a call informing him that his dad didn't have long to live, so he wanted to go see him. James didn't seem at all interested in helping, so I volunteered to take him and to stay for moral support, and we headed out. On the way to see his dad, Mike started telling me his dad has dementia and makes up weird things, so he advised me not to take anything to heart. He cited a few examples of things he previously said, and they were all more like accusations. One of them being that Mike had stolen all the money in his savings. I thought it was pretty odd, but couldn't really reconcile the vast difference between the Mike I had met 8 years before and someone who could rob his dying father. While we were visiting his dad, I didn't say much, as I didn't want to insert myself into a private family moment, but I kept noticing things that were weird, like that his dad was fully conscious and talkative and didn't seem like a dying man at all. He even asked us to get him Burger King in the middle of it all. I kept trying to justify things in my head, like, who am I to say a dying man can't want a final meal at Burger King? A few hours in, James called, irate that I had left again without doing the dishes, that Mike promised to do. He chewed me out and threatened divorce, which was always his go-to to try to whip me into shape, and having the recent affirmation from Mike that I wasn't the only one who saw James' emotional abuse, I said, fine, divorce won't be thrown in my face anymore, so divorce it is. Back in Mike's dad's room, his dad was yelling about his will and money and such, and Mike looked at me in a way to signal that the dementia was talking. I had started to really question what happened with his dad and if he was really even dying at all, but it wasn't something I could really handle investigating at the moment, given that I just separated from my husband. When we left the hospital, Mike's dad was still alive and eating candy bars. I had nowhere else to go, so I went back home and slept upstairs on the couch. I didn't speak to James for 2 whole days, and then Mike said he talked to his mom, and I could stay there for a week. I wondered why his mom wasn't the one helping him if they were in contact and on good terms, but I just accepted the offer. I couldn't take being at that house anymore. Mike said he was going to go with me and stay there too, which I thought looked really bad, but he said he spoke to James and that he understood and was fine with it. I spent the entire week crying and talking to Mike about how I felt, and he even woke up in the middle of the night with me if I woke up and started spiraling downhill. He made no advances on me or anything of the sort. After the week, I went to stay with my parents, and Mike went back to stay with James. I eventually saw them both when I come over to get things, and in talking with James, he was very much ready for Mike to leave. They barely seemed to talk and did not seem on good terms whatsoever. One night, I got the weirdest impulse to ask James if Mike ever said anything about me, that he made him promise not to tell me. James hesitated for a second but said yes. Through a series of questions, we inched through both of our experiences with Mike. He had been playing into our rapidly declining marriage and using everything he observed against us. He had been going out and teaching me things to make money, and he did the same thing he did as my boss all those years before. Told me my strengths and complimented my ability to catch up onto things quickly. We didn't have much success, but it was very obviously not on account of me. However, he was going back and feeding into James' terrible opinion of me, and claiming we weren't making any money because I was so dense and hard to teach. Mike would also comment on the very same things he told me were unacceptable that James did, except he'd tell James how he doesn't know how he lives with someone like me and that he'd go insane. He was carefully and strategically forcing our marriage to fall apart by exaggerating our personal fears and insecurities and systematically validating and encouraging our resentment for one another. He did it in such a way that neither of us doubted his sincerity for a moment, until I finally got a weird feeling and decided to ask that night. And even then, I didn't really anticipate finding out that he had been two-faced and manipulative to that extreme. James kicked him out that night, and neither of us had talked to him again. As far as I know, I haven't spoken to James in like 1.5 years. I proceeded with the divorce despite this, because even though Mike was an insincere piece of shit, he caused me to get enough distance from James that I was able to see I deserved so much better. Last I heard about Mike was from his mom, who called me to see why he'd been asked so abruptly to leave James' house. I told her what he'd done, and she didn't seem surprised. I asked if she was aware of any mental problems he may have, and she said she didn't want to betray her son by giving details, but that he isn't right in the head. I asked about several of the traumatic events Mike had claimed to be the victim of, and she said there have never been evidence that any of it really happened. I don't know why he actually initiated the final downfall of my marriage, because I never felt it was an attempt to be with me. I don't get what his motivation or gain would have been. Mike's mom texted me a few days after he left James' house to tell me he had been admitted to a psychiatric facility and wouldn't be out for a long time. She wouldn't elaborate. This incident happened in the summer of 2015. I lived by myself in a nice house inside a small town. Low crime, but still the occasional shady fucker. Anyway, at work that day on a smoke break, I watched a dog get thrown from a moving vehicle, 4-lane city traffic during the start of rush hour. I ran right out there, scooped his little ass up, and booked it back to my workplace. He wasn't injured, amazingly. As a bleeding heart animal lover, I decided to take him home with me until I could figure out what to do with him. I have a large number of cats and always have. This was my first experience with a dog that I was solely responsible for. This guy was very shy, head hung, tail tucked, and jumpy, just looking at me like I was about to beat him. I was clueless on the subject of dog personalities and tendencies. I just knew that they needed to be taken out frequently. His first night with me, we had been out about 15 times, as I didn't want him shitting in my house. I was having my final cigarette of the day on my porch. The dog was on the lead, chilling under my chair as I smoked and poked about on Reddit. I see a man walking on the sidewalk that runs by my house. He kept glancing up at me before passing. Shortly after he passed my house, he stopped, turned on his heel, and approached. "Hey, can you tell me where 302 Church Street is?" he asked. I told him I would search the address on my phone, which of course was taking a minute to pull up. He explained that he didn't have a phone of his own and was attempting to get to a friend's house, taking small steps toward me the whole time. Finally, the address I summoned came up. "It's exactly 2 blocks north of here, right on the southwest corner of the cross street," I told him, pointing in the direction. He kept his eyes locked on me, continuing to slowly move closer. Doggo starts growling very softly at this point. I had forgotten he was even there until now. "Mind if I take a look at the map?" He grinned sheepishly. "I'm bad with directions." I rose from my seat, pointing again. "It's truly just 2 blocks up this road. Just follow the road. 2 blocks. The house will be on your left," making it very clear that I wasn't going to just hand him my phone. "Well, can I call them? I need to let them know I'm coming," he said, still creeping closer, extending his hands. "No," I replied. "How about texting them?" Pushing forward still. "Dude, no." I started toward my door. Just let me see your phone." He was visibly becoming pissed off, clearly trying to contain it and getting way too close to my porch. As a last-ditch effort to get this dude to fuck off, I say, "You need to get off my yard. My dog is protective, he'll fuck you up." Hell, I didn't know the first thing about this dog, let alone whether he had the capacity to screw someone up. I just hoped saying so would intimidate the pushy phone guy. Like I had said the magic words. Popper springs into action. The wolf creature from the never-ending story emerges like a fucking bullet from under the chair, growling, snarling, barking his little ass off. He jerks me damn near off the porch trying to get at this guy. He sounded and acted like an 80-pound attack dog, not a 40-pound timid beagle mix. I was afraid. I didn't know if the pup would turn on me. As stated previously at the time, I knew absolutely jack shit about dogs. He backed his hindquarters into my legs and almost nudged me to the door. Still carrying on, eyes locked on the phone dude and baring his teeth. Phone dude holds up his hands and backs off. Stammers something like, 2 blocks north? Yeah? And begins walking that way. I go inside, cut off my lights, and peek out the window at him. Glances at my house, assured I'm inside, turns, and begins walking in the completely opposite direction I pointed him in. Icing on the cake, he pulls a phone from his pocket and raises it to his ear to make a call. Doggo secured his place as a member of the family that night. He is incredibly protective of me and has frightened away another creep since this incident. He's attached to my hip and has made it known that he is grateful to be in a safe, loving home, wherein he will never again become a projectile from a moving vehicle. His name is Hank, and I truly believe that night would have ended very poorly for me had he not been there.